there. Welcome to Literary as Feck. All right. So, Clive, you're going to explain to us what you've chosen for us to talk about this week. This week was your choice. So, let the audience know what you're going to inflict on them this week.
Okay. So, yeah, let me just change to speaker view here. Oh, well, see, I'm seeing you, but last time I did this, I think the close-up was actually on me. So I'm gonna bet on this actually being me, so okay. the viewer can actually see this. Cryptozoology Anthology. Go back to smooth Oji-san style. Cryptozoology Anthology. Strange and mysterious creatures in men's adventure magazines.
Right, MAMs, as they are, short to in this, which is a word for Irish mother.
Mam, yeah, we say mam in Welsh.
Oh yeah, there you go, Welsh as well. Maybe it's a.
So, and this is actually from the Men's Adventure Library imprint, which is relatively new. And yeah, so I guess MAMs, to get that out the way first, just in case people are not familiar with men's adventure magazines, these would have been, I don't know, what would you, like a couple of rungs lower than your Times and Life and like that, right? Kind of
kind of a pulpy,
yeah, kind of
quality.
Lifestyle magazines to a certain extent, but also with literature mixed in, and I'm guessing like news and articles to keep up to date with all that is manly.
Yes, I felt like I should have really grown a handlebar mustache for this episode. I feel like the Sideburns are not manly enough, because the magazine titles, they're always like Men.
Yes.
Or Man's Adventure.
Right.
Or your favorite one, which was Rage.
That's great. Here we go. There's a Rage with a woman being molested by what looks like a very skinny Incredible Hulk, but it's supposed to be a
some kind of abominable snowman of some kind. Yeah.
But this is a kind of a typical men's adventure magazine cover, right? Semi-clad woman in some kind of peril, or something more along the lines of from Man's Conquest magazine, some kind of war.
Yeah, that. I mean, it's where you probably can't see it that clearly, but that guy's facial expression on that painting is incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I also like some of the other articles. The Lolita Harem of John Pigott. Amazing Adventures of Peter LaRoche. Last Man on Mexico's Island of Outcast Girls.
Yes, we'll get to this, I think, at the end, because I have something to say about how those articles fit into the bigger picture of what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
But I guess.
And sorry, just to add another, the other leg to the stool as well is casual racism. So yes, incredible two-man mission that broke a Jap invasion. So, and there's lots of bone through the nose native stuff.
That will show up definitely in the stories that were collected in this anthology for sure. Without a huge amount of comment from the editors, I noticed in the introductory pieces to each, because each of these stories that's been kind of culled from these various magazines is presented usually with a little bit of an explanation of maybe situating who wrote it, or whether it was being presented as pure fact, or whether it was being presented as fiction. And then basically, I think the whole intro explains how these men's adventure magazines are one of the only places that enthusiasts for cryptids. And I guess, do you want to explain what a cryptid is to those who aren't in the know, Clive?
Yeah. So just to context as well. So we're talking 50s through to maybe 70s,
70s.
maybe early 80s. I mean, do you remember? Sorry, I'm not ignoring your question. I'll get back to it. But do you actually remember? And I don't even know if they were particularly British. I'm sure we must have had our variations. Do you remember seeing magazines like this on the shelves? I don't really remember seeing.
No. I would have seen them in secondhand bookshops after I moved to Canada, but they would have definitely been vintage looking already. So no, I don't remember really.
Right. Yes. So cryptids. It's basically bollocks. It's made up animals that don't exist.
So cryptozoology enthusiasts who've tuned into this episode, please be aware that Clive thinks it's all a bunch of malarkey, and I'm afraid that I also, if we're going to situate ourselves relative to this, don't really believe any of this stuff either.
No,
although I have a friend who does quite fervently believe in this stuff, and so
it's interesting. I suppose it's interesting because it's, I mean, there's borderline examples. For example, giant squid.
Yes,
right,
which is made much of in this book because, of course, they were discovered after being written off as fervid imaginings and drunken, hallucinations and so on. And then, of course, they have, so that's a trump card for the cryptid enthusiasts is to be like, aha, but don't forget about the giant squid.
But of course, it's it could, if you consider that the majority of the Earth is underwater and we've never, it's akin to space almost.
Yes,
it's not that surprising that something. But
no, we're still finding things all the time in the seas that we don't know were there. Yes,
but I'm less convinced that there's a big furry man walking around.
Hominid races of Neanderthal type humans. Yeah.
Or the Loch Ness monster, I suppose, is the other classic.
Yes.
Example.
Well,
one of my favorite stories in
the T-Rex.
Yeah.
We'll get. I think we should almost do them story by story. We don't have to talk about them in depth, but I think we should touch on because I've written a few notes as we go through.
Blend, and I will be upfront about this as well. There was some skipping done. I don't know if you read the whole thing.
I think I more or less did, but definitely it's a variable quality, and there's a lot of repetition. Like I felt like I could have done with more variation in my monsters. There's a lot of stories about Sasquatches and abominable snowmen, of which there's a bit of an overlap already there. And I kind of felt like I would have liked more of the fishmen or dinosaurs or sea beast stuff, or even the giant bird.
Also, I was a little disappointed that nothing ever went quite as like I was expecting something racier along the lines of that film. What's it called? Vic Morrow, isn't it? The gill men come out of the water and rape women on the beach.
Oh, Humanoids of the Deep.
Yes, I was.
Or don't forget Horror of Party Beach, which is the same movie made.
Unfortunately, a lot of these things are closer to that in my there wasn't full on rapey gill man action on the beach, which I thought there might be.
Actually,
although
a few of the stories
I wanted to so talking over each other there.
We're so excited.
Yes. We're filled with rage as well.
Manly action.
So I wanted to talk about this imprint as well, and why I chose this book, and then that will lead me into slightly my opinions, and then we can kind of get into the meat of it.
Okay.
So this is edited by Robert Dace, David Coleman, and Wyatt Doyle, and they run this this men's adventure library, and they've put out other books as well. So for example, so there's this one, there's the Weasels Ripped My Flesh.
Yeah, that one does look good.
Yeah, it does. And of course famously the Frank Zappa album, which did take existing, that was men's adventure art. And there's also the He-Men, Bagmen, and Nymphos. There's like a couple, I think, devoted to men's adventure stories about Cuba.
Okay.
Specifically about Cuba, there's this one looks quite good as well. A Handful of Hell.
Yes. Yeah.
Classic war and adventure stories. And again, so bike. Oh yeah, sorry, I need to mention this one as well. Barbarians on bikes. That one looks pretty great.
Yes.
So I was clued into this imprint because Justin Marriott interviewed, I can't remember specifically who he interviewed, but some of these people in one of the either Paperback Fanatic or one of the Paperback Fanatic spin-off themes. And what I was initially really interested at is, so there is some precedent for like coffee table books that have reprinted the art from these magazines, which is phenomenal. I mean, some of it is just like really, stubbly, sweaty.
Grimy looking guys.
Stubbly, sweaty, big GI, garroting a Nazi while blood sprays across the woman's cleavage. Or, it's all the great stuff that we love.
Stuff that Quentin Tarantino would be fervently masturbating over, and thinking, this is my next movie. This front cover.
Yeah, and all that stuff's great. But I've always had this, be careful what you wish for. I've always had this thing about, well, that's all well and good, but I want to know what the stories are like.
Yes.
And being when trashy literature is, it has just the right dosage, then there's nothing finer,
Yes.
But it's difficult to get it quite right. So I always wondered, what do these actually read like? And actually collecting these magazines is expensive and time consuming, and there's serious collectors of this stuff. So with this Men's Adventure Library imprint, they specifically have gone out of their way to actually reprint the stories, as well as very welcome. They do, again, Rage for Men is another great cover. They do reprint the covers and some of the splash art as well, which is also very welcome.
The art is all awesome.
Here we go. Here's a very typical sweating men's adventure man.
Yes.
That's classic.
With the native in the background.
No tits in this one, so it's not classic.
No. But it's interesting to wonder, like, if you look at that cover and think about Indiana Jones, like how much, those things were kind of playing with those tropes as well. Right.
So I was quite pleased to find, someone's actually reprinting the stories. Now, this is more like it. And thinking about, like I said, there's one about Cuba, there's bikers or whatever. And I was thinking, which one should I go for? And I was thinking, okay, well, it's got to be the crypto one, right? Because it is, it also throws into the mix our interests in kind of fantasy, horror, science fiction. So I thought this would be a shoo-in to talk to Tria's Feck, which it is. But I have to admit, now having kind of read these stories, I kind of understand why they haven't been reprinted. Right? I think I'm still kind of interested in reading some of the stuff as well that they put out, but I kind of get why the fandom has been specifically focused on the artwork, rather than the literature.
But I mean, I did wonder, and I am going to ask you. I'm going to come back to the question of what is cryptozoology and what is a cryptid, so that our listeners will know. You better have done your research before you got here, folks. But it's that whole thing. So this was obviously collected and edited, and people had sifted through magazines. But the problem with that is one man's treasure is another man's trash. Right. And so I couldn't help but wonder, were there other things that I might have been more interested in buried in these stacks and stacks of magazines, and that these editors had chosen things for one reason or another, but that I was like, do we need 4 very similar stories about climbing, in the Himalayas and finding, I mean, it's interesting how, you can line them up and be like, okay, these elements are the same, or this story has something else. But I'm kind of, I felt like there had to have been lots of other stories that,
Well, it's interesting you say that. It's interesting that we both seem to have had slightly different thoughts. For me, I have to admit, maybe naively, I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt. Like, I just assumed, oh, it's pretty thin gruel, and these might actually represent
the best ones.
Yeah. Whereas you're saying there's, and you're quite right. There's a good possibility that, maybe they just didn't pick very well, or they couldn't. They were limited in what they could reproduce.
Yes. Yeah. I wonder that too. Or just if their own interest, if they were just three guys really interested in Yetis and didn't consider the fact that the cryptid world, which again, we will eventually explain what that word means, is much broader than just Sasquatches and Yetis, which this book is like 75% Sasquatch and Yeti.
Right. So, I mean, the writers as well. I mean, generally, none of these writers were known to me,
with the notable exception of Arthur C. Clarke.
Yes. And I have to admit as well, because his story is about halfway through the book, or even earlier than that, and I'd read some of the other rubbish, and I was like, oh, at least this will be good.
Right.
Kind of a little let down by the Arthur. It's not really. I mean, it's obviously more well written than the other stuff in general. Like, the man can write, but it didn't. It wasn't much more interesting to me than
it's quite a short story, and it was written obviously for whatever one of these men's adventure magazines. So I doubt he was that worried about giving them his best work or spending that much time on it.
Right.
But
I was just reminding myself actually what his story was.
His story is about, and it has a kind of almost a Lovecraftian,
incredible monster man sightings in the US. 20 scientists can't explain.
Yes. No, that wasn't the Arthur C. Clarke's one. Is the one about the guy.
Oh yeah, sorry, that was the one before.
Who gets told a story by somebody else in a bar, basically over about a scientist who'd invented a way of controlling animals by kind of neural induction by using electricity.
Yes, the reckless ones.
Yes,
and so splash art with a pen or something there.
And funnily enough, it's actually one of the few stories that touches on a cryptid that turned out to not be a cryptid. That that it is actually about a giant squid, which does exist.
He was fascinated with giant squids, wasn't he? And also he's kind of an interesting touchstone if you think about. We were trying to pass out the junction of science and bullshit, and I suppose Arthur C. Clarke's a kind of interesting figure because he did write a lot, and he also hosted all those TV shows, right?
Oh yes.
Mysterious World and stuff like that. But then on the other hand, he had a pretty good grip on proper science, and so he's one of those few figures I think who's almost worth listening to talking about this stuff, because he seems like a rational man trying to figure his way through. But it's a shame that his story in this isn't particularly interesting.
No, it's a short little horror story basically. And it's not particularly atmospheric or it's
no. It's a shame. It would be better if it had one of those endings, like, it's at the door.
Which hilariously one of the other stories does have.
Yes.
But anyway, so cryptozoology, Clive.
Right.
What is cryptozoology?
That's a bunch of shit, isn't it? Well, are you after? Because I actually didn't look. Are you actually after a dictionary definition?
I mean, I suppose I don't know. I mean, my understanding is cryptozoology is the study of animals that are believed to exist, but to my mind, likely don't or don't.
Yeah,
but
there's no proof of them. Or,
yes.
Yeah, or not enough. Or So we're talking about abominable, early in the morning, abominable snowmen, Yetis, Sasquatch, Loch Ness Monster, I don't know, banshees. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, right? I actually have a rather fun book. I should have dug it out from when I was a kid. Actually, I brought it back with me. I found it in the attic on one of my visits back to the UK, and it's like the it's either Piccolo or Pan dictionary of, you know, imaginary beasts and monsters. It's like an A to Z.
It is interesting that you just said banshee, because I was actually thinking about this as I was thinking about my own relation to this whole question of cryptozoology, and I was thinking, so trying to understand it is, so cryptozoology to me means non-supernatural in some way, like the idea that this is a biological entity that lives on the earth. Whereas, so because I was thinking about, like, because growing up in Ireland, obviously I grew up with stories of the banshee, or I mean the Sidhe in general, which are the mounds, right, where the, you know, the whatever, the fairy folk or whatever you want to call them live, and you know, leprechauns and all that stuff. Not that people in Ireland actually believe in leprechauns that I'm aware of, but yeah, but I would say, but that stuff is all supernatural or ghostly or fairy or whatever. But cryptozoology seems to have this idea that no, like, with the application of science, we can solve the mystery of, you know,
well,
which I suppose some people believe that about the paranormal as well.
Yeah, well, but I think there is a kind of weird, where does one begin and the other one leave? I mean, you mentioned the leprechaun, for example. Like, there's elements of the leprechaun legend that could lend itself to crypto. If you take away the, you know, gold at the end of the rainbow stuff, it's like a Irish version of like a pygmy or something, I guess. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
yeah.
So and there's and even if you think about something like, because I remember this Piccolo book, surprisingly, with all the other things you'd expect, they have like vampires or werewolves, and I suppose they're kind of at that weird. Is it cryptozoology or is it
right?
I mean, it's all bollocks.
Yes.
Cryptozoology. I like my overview of the
right. So I suppose one of the arguments made is that there was a time when, you know, there wasn't an internet, and where there weren't necessarily books in large numbers being published devoted to this, you know. So it was apparently for the enthusiast, the cryptozoologist enthusiast, the main source of information about these topics was coming in these articles in these men's adventure magazines. And
I guess the subject matter would, you know, a lot of slightly higher, the slicks as they call them, even though there's one story in here from Argosy, but like Argosy, for example, they were slightly you know, not
there's something a bit embarrassing about the whole thing. So you would kind of like, we'll keep that off to the side, or we'll make fun of it rather than, you know, take it seriously and present it as fact or something verging on fact.
There we go, just another example. True weird. You can't really see there very well, maybe, but a woman in a bikini being menaced by humanoids from the deep.
The Innsmouth look is strong in those folk. That's one of, I quite liked those stories because they had that very clear Lovecraft kind of thing going on.
I also like, and I'm not just being facetious and pervy here, there is something about when you do throw in the sex as well, there is that kind of fascinating, there seemed to be a fascination with men really wanted to see beautiful women like molested by, you know, beasts, monsters and animals and monsters, and you can't help but you let your mind go down that route to its end game, and it's kind of, it's strange. Why would that be a fetish? I mean, why would you want to see
that? Will come up, I think, when we talk about a couple of the stories in more detail. But yeah, I mean, it's funny too, because we talked about this before, but I spent my teenage years in a town in Canada that's famous for probably Canada's most famous cryptid. there is supposedly a lake serpent, which is believed by cryptozoology kind of true believers to be a plesiosaur, which is some sort of dinosaur.
Right.
That has somehow survived way past its, expiry date and lives in Lake Okanagan, which is, unfathomably deep as a lake, and it's got strange currents. People who fall into the lake often don't get pulled out again because they just kind of end up at the bottom in places that are inaccessible. And there are strange rip currents. Even though it's a lake, there are currents that can take you out and drown you. So, whether or not the interior Salish people, who are the, the people who originally owned and still technically, I think actually British Columbia is an interesting province because no treaties were signed there. So really, legally, all of the land is still owned by the interior and Coast Salish peoples. So anyway, that's an ongoing negotiation, I think. But they named it, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong because I don't speak interior Salish, but Nahaitik, something along those lines. And then when Europeans came there and started hearing the stories and started then repeating them, and people started claiming to see it, it became known as Ogopogo, which I think was more easy to sell plush toys of, which now is one of Kelowna's main things, is, selling. But it was sufficiently believed in, and there's been enough sightings of it, that Fuji Television sent a submarine over in the late 80s and explored the depths of the lake over a period of days for a TV special. Spoiler alert, they did not find any evidence. Yes.
I think they did the same thing at Loch Ness, right, as well.
Yes, yeah. And it's funny too. You and I are reading another book right now about Aleister Crowley, and in two different ways he came into my mind as I was reading this book. One was all of these stories of mountain climbing in the in Nepal and Tibet and stuff like that. I immediately kept thinking, like, when is Aleister Crowley going to show up and wrestle with a Yeti? And then Yeti. And then why is there no Loch Ness monster in this book? Like, there's a brief mention of a few kind of sea beasts near the end, but generally speaking, they stayed well away from the whole. And it seems to me that Ogopogo and the Loch Ness monster and lake and sea serpents are kind of they're a pretty big cryptid, and the book gives them very short shrift.
I'm wondering if it actually might. I'm wondering how much the selection might have been cut down because of the elements not. And just to for people who haven't read the book, who might not understand why that makes any sense, because you can just reprint or whatever. What they do, which I do appreciate here, actually, something I like that they do is, so you'll have, so for instance, in the case of Truitt, you'll have the cover, and then you'll have the story reprinted. But what they do is, the first page, they'll actually reprint the original splash artwork.
Quite nice,
yeah, and the beginning of the story. And the first time they did it, I went, and I started reading it, and then hang on, they start again. And any other accompanying little clip art and stuff they have as well, which is really nice. So in order for something to be in this magazine, they have to have
the art,
not only the cover art, but also the splash art has to be reproducible, right? So I'm wondering if that, I'm wondering how many of these things in their collection had like coffee cup rings, and that kind of stuff, which I wouldn't have mind seeing reprinted, but
or possibly there were pages. I'm sure there were pages in these magazines that wouldn't have warranted. They weren't a feature story, right? So they wouldn't have had a piece of art that went with them at all. So maybe that was another thing. Well, we don't have a nice piece of art for that, so we're not going to bother.
Right. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with the selection beyond just that they chose their favorites or the best, or.
But so what I'll say is, what I didn't know before reading this book is that, obviously I knew that I was living in a town that had a plesiosaur in the lake, which I would occasionally swim in. But what I didn't know was that British Columbia was also full of wild giants. So thanks to reading this book, I now know that the wild giants of BC, I'm quite surprised I wasn't tripping over them every time I went on a hike.
Right. Yeah, they're everywhere.
And there's a few things about that first thing that I think are really interesting. One is, like, this is from 1952, and it's supposedly written by somebody who would have worked for, and I'm using this word only because it's used in the Canadian, it is what it's still called, I believe, like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, right?
Okay.
And that's kind of enshrined in law, so the word is still being used, even though it's, obviously not the preferred word, right? But basically, this guy's job would have been kind of to oversee or interfere in the lives of, or however else, some indigenous, people, some reserved, some. And I find it fascinating that on the one hand, he does this really smart thing, and they do this later in the book too, where it's kind of like, if you don't believe these stories, you're a racist, right? Because this guy is a white guy, right? And it's not only is he a white guy working for the government, basically, as I said, a lot of the people who worked for the Indian Affairs were like not great people and didn't treat the people that they were supposed to be kind of, in charge of very well. But anyway, so he kind of gets to say this, and then at the same time, he kind of keeps saying like, there's a very patronizing kind of way in which he speaks about these people that I take care of, like, oh, they're very good, like, they're trustworthy people. I believe their stories, but I still have to take care of them because they can't be trusted to take care of themselves. But anyway, this is something that I've noticed, it comes up a few times, this idea of, well, because indigenous people believe this, if you don't believe it, then that's probably because you're a racist.
Right. But you do have to have it communicated to you.
Oh, by a white person, yes.
Yeah. And this is in Sir magazine.
Yes.
Magazine for males. This is a horrendous Babe Ruth on that. This is horrible. Yeah. Stick a chick in a bikini being attacked by a Yeti.
A Yeti, which is in that. It's in one of the.
I'm not going to buy that.
Yeah, no. But yeah, here's a direct quote. I do not question the truth of his story. It is but one of many such tales regarding the Sasquatch or wild giants I've heard firsthand from Indians under my care.
And there is the wild giants of British Columbia.
But again, what's presented as just almost fact is wonderful. Like in Chehalis, BC, it is known that two Sasquatch tribes nearly exterminated each other with stone clubs. I'm like, cool. And then this idea that there's a Morris Mountain that has kind of a Sasquatch family reunion every year, but like they can't climb high enough to see it. So, oh well, but it's happening up there. Like, trust us. And then the amazing story in that first one about the young indigenous girl who's abducted, and right away, it's 1952. Right away, we're into this sex territory. She's abducted by a Sasquatch who rubs tree gum across her eyes so she's blinded. Chases up into the forest with her. Lives with her in a cave with his mom and dad Sasquatch for a year. She gets knocked up, then starts feeling kind of sick and pleads with her Sasquatch, who she can talk to.
Yeah.
Pleads with her Sasquatch new family to take her back home. She goes back home. She gives birth to some sort of half Sasquatch creature, which happily dies. She says, and at the end,
it's a twisted world of the 50s, right? That when you had to construct these really elaborate things to get your thrills from. It's fascinating.
And then obviously, and then later on in one of the other stories, it comes up that it's repeatedly mentions like 3 teenage girls, came across like a band of Sasquatch, or like, I think they're the abominable swamp slobs, as they're called in that story. The asses, literally, is the acronym. And I kept coming back to that. You remember that nudist camp movie where the Sasquatch keeps abducting the girls to molest them? The Beast and the Beauties, or the Beauties and the Beast? Yeah. Which that got a lot of rental from me at the age of 16. It's surprisingly explicit for something you would just find in the horror section of the video store.
Right.
But anyway, good movie.
This one, is it called The Geek? There's like an early 80s one where some kind of Sasquatch rapes women.
The molester Sasquatch seems to have been a minor trope in.
Actually, I seem to remember it.
Okay.
Explicit,
I don't think I've seen it. But so that's our first story, and then we've got the fish with human hands story. Fish with human hands attacked me.
This is
from November 1955.
I kind of enjoyed.
Yep.
Because it's a little bit unusual, and it's not a great story, but it's just this is one I actually
the
read.
Drawings are great. The illustrations in that are fantastic,
and it's short.
Yeah.
And I like the drawings above show bottom to top the evolutionary stages man passed through in emerging from the sea and acquiring hand and feet development of today.
Yes, because in the story we're told that
there's a major jump somewhere.
Yeah, fairly large. Yeah, I'm sure there's a missing link in there somewhere. But basically, this is the one in Nicaragua. Some skin diving lady is basically molested by a fish frog human hybrid. Like he has the head of a frog, the chest of a man, like the chest of a man and arms, but also kind of gills and fish-like appendages. And again, this is the first one where we have this whole thing of like this attempt to wed. Well, we all know that, scientists are constantly discovering new animals, and, we do not know all that lives under the sky and sea. And so, so sure, there's fish frog men.
I think what overall as well, what this collection has made me like, I'm not going to actively, because it's an expensive man's hobby, but if I were to ever come across like a stack of old men's adventure magazines at a reasonable price, I would buy them, because I think there's something to be said for actually reading the magazine cover to cover and seeing these stories mixed in with stuff about sports and and ads, and I think it makes kind of more sense. Then.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Would overall be a more fun reading experience, because there's a bit more variety of manliness rather than.
Yes. It's not just the cryptid. Yeah. But then there's also in that story, there's a great part where they there's a historical section about it in 1642 where a fisherman pulled one of these same fish frog men out of the sea, and then it was like put on display in public and everyone saw it. I don't know what there's no sources given for any of this information, but I liked that bit. I enjoyed that. Some guy ran up with an oar and beat the shit out of it. It was like it was like, "'Tis no fish, but the devil ye have there," and beat the living tar out of the poor thing. There's
an art. It's funny. So my problem I had with a lot of these stories is they're written in a easy to read style that often tips over into too easy to read, if you know what I mean. So it's just, and you read like a page or two and what have I read? It's because it's so ultra generic. But there's a certain art to that, I suppose you could argue, and there's also an art to writing that kind of in that style where you just throw in these little tidbits that try and validate, without them jumping out at you, right? Like to seed them in there. And there's a kind of art to it, I suppose, and I do appreciate that. But I suppose reading a whole bunch of them in one go,
right,
all very similar, is
you see, and you definitely see the strategies employed again and again and again. And what's fascinating to me is that right now you don't necessarily have access to this in Japan, but there is so much of that on TV now. Like the History Channel here, that's all it is. It's all that Eric von Daniken. It's all about cryptids. It's all about UFOs. It's all about paranormal shit. And it's always those things. Could it be? Is it possible? We talked to this expert who they never
know.
Yes.
Kind of. One little thing, right? To hook you into the next episode.
And they never find anything. That's the other thing. Like it's always like next week maybe we'll find evidence of the.
You've got to be vigilant with that crap, because I get it. I've been sucked in myself, and there's a certain amount of fun to be had to be willingly fooled and go along with it or whatever. And some shows are better than others. But you find you look back, I've been watching nothing but
Yeah.
crap for the past 6
Yes.
months. So
Yes.
you sometimes you do have to come down hard on yourself. You have to be like, right, no more. I refuse. I refuse to watch this anymore.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's endless. It's endless.
Oh yeah, yeah,
endless,
yeah. It's just just warrens and rabbit holes that lead to other rabbit holes.
So I think that's the other thing I might have slight prejudice against this in a way, because I'm getting the overall feeling that I think you might have enjoyed this collection a bit more than I did.
Well, I'm going to highlight the things that I did enjoy, but yeah, but I generally overall would agree with you that I think a lot of it was boring and simplistic,
Oh,
and particularly the stuff that was presented as like lists of like sightings, like that stuff was just, my brain just shut off, and there was a few that were just long lists of like, but the things that were presented.
Sorry, I've trained myself over the years because of that stuff we were talking about, and maybe sometimes too harshly, but I've like an alarm bell goes off or something, and it's like, woo, woo. It's like, okay, this is a waste of your time, and that's perfectly fine, but just be aware that it is, and you now have the option to chuck this in the corner or carry on with anything. And just because I'm aware of how much stuff there is out there to read and I'm interested in, I sometimes am a little bit harsh about cutting this stuff off at the knees,
Yes, but I will say, so then the next story is the first of the many, I think the 18 stories about hunting for yetis or yetes in the Himalayas, and there's the overlap in all of these stories is the heroic white man, and then he always has like a native guide who then has to bully the sub-native characters. Like there's always these cowardly coolies, who are the porters, or who are usually the ones who get murdered, or that seems to be like a recurring feature of this kind of this white man's burden adventure, and this is just the first of many of these. But what's also fascinating, this is the first one that feels purely like a story that you would just find like an actual, like a fiction story, but that is being presented as fact. Like, this is an experience I had of seeing a yeti.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's interesting to note, if you're not a particularly discerning reader, where heaven forbid that readers of Rage weren't discerning readers, but
yes,
but it's interesting how
they probably didn't know, they couldn't remember what they'd read.
Just putting that framing device, that's it. You don't have to change it almost. You could take it out of a.
Oh, I feel like that was what happened.
Yeah, and then just put it over here and put true above it.
Yeah,
that's all you need to do, right?
Yeah, as long as the author's name matches the name of the character in the story.
Yes.
Like because they're all first-person kind of narratives.
And if you get that and you're reading Mail magazine, you can of course read a doctor's 14 sure ways to get instant sex from any woman.
So again, I'd like to come back to that at the very end. I'd like to come back to that whole strain because I think it's really important in relation to all this.
As we go along, I'd
like you to do that. Keep doing that because as I said, this is a through line for me. I had a major revelation quite near the end of the book. I was like, oh my God, and I want to talk about what that was. So then we have the abominable swamp slobs or asses, which is kind of our swamp thing, man thing, boggy creek, movies. Basically these are particularly filthy, foul, pee-smelling Sasquatches. But that's just a list of like, and then Bobby May Sue saw one here, and then and it's boring.
New GI paradise, erotic city of supermarket love, whatever the hell that means, but it sounds great.
It does. And then I think we had the I will say though, actually in that story, there's a byline, or like not a byline, but there's like a detail that I think I wonder is true. I wonder if it's true, and I wanted to look this one up. It says in 1969, the Skamania County Board of Commissioners placed an ordinance making it illegal to kill a Sasquatch. And I was like, I wonder if that's the kind of that could well have happened in some backwater in the US, you know. So
bit of artwork here from Gil Cohen, as well as famous for the Executioner Mac Bolan.
Okay, cover as well.
Right.
Prehistoric. Then we have the Arthur C. Clarke. So we already talked about that. I don't think we need to talk about that. Then we have another one of these. Then we have a British Columbia story. Yeah, that's the really Lovecraftian one. The Hunt for the Half Man, Half Ape of North America from Men.
Men, and that's the one with the ape on it. And also this looks like a great story. Breakout.
Yes, that one does
mad
look good.
cons on a brutal 48 terror spree.
Oh, I have to say, talking about burying the lead, as you go through, see if you can catch like this one where it's like I'm like, why isn't that article in this book? Even though it doesn't actually fit the authors or the editors kind of whatever. But there's one that was like, Russians have figured out the secret to resurrecting the dead. Something like that. And I was like, they have? Well, like, holy shit.
I never knew. Yeah. I quite like this. This sounds pretty exciting to me. The book everyone's talking about.
Honolulu Madam. I noted that one too.
The outspoken autobiography of a Hawaiian girl who became a sex legend.
Yeah. But so this one is interesting. This one is definitely a fiction story that's now been dressed up as fact. Although this is also, I think, if you go in, this is the one where they've got photographs and they've airbrushed a pair of sunglasses onto one of the two dudes.
This is good. Does this look like a man to be trusted? Like, this really looks like it was just taken in their office, right? And like,
and it's written as a story, and it gets increasingly like it's written as one of those like Haunter in the Dark kind of like Lovecraft stories where there's a guy in a lone cabin and there's an increasing sense of dread of something out there is kind of pressing in on him, and he's writing a diary kind of a thing.
Right,
and it literally ends with like the dramatic. There's dramatic ellipses in his diary entries that we're presented with. Yeah, it's hilarious. And but anyway, it's another Wild Men of British Columbia story. It's another one of these Sasquatches that kill some dude because he ventures too far into their territory, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So and then go ahead.
I was going to say the next one is actually the one I enjoyed the most.
Yeah. That one, and one of the, and weirdly enough, one of the later ones about Yetis, which we'll get to, is actually the other one that I probably like the most. But yeah, this one,
The Thing at Dutchman's Rig, which is again about a white man who has to go into a deepest, darkest New Guinea to find
an oil well.
Yeah, basically, and
this one's not. What? Sorry.
They discover a T-Rex.
Yes. This one is that's interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. A, the racism isn't even casual; it's full on, full bore about the indigenous people of the area.
But this worked for me just as a fun story. I actually
no, that's exactly
ripped all the way through.
Yes, yeah, it's weird because again, like I was like, well, this one had to have just been presented as like a fiction. But then I went back, I was like, no, this appears like they were attempting to tell, again, like the character's name matches the name of the author, and it's being presented as like, this really happened to me. And in which case, that story is fascinating because the main character is a douchebag.
Yes.
Right? Like, he's an asshole. Like, he sleeps with the other guy's wife, right?
Him, the man in question.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he sleeps with like, whatever, I can't remember the whatever their name is, the Oliveras or whatever, the family that are taking him, or like whatever, the husband and wife team that are making him take them. Oh no, wait, I'm thinking of the wrong thing.
Yes,
I'm thinking of the one later on. No, yeah, this is just the one where this is the one where he's got like Charlie or whatever his name is.
I should have stayed in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yes.
Yes, this is from Showdown for Men. Some of their other stories are Love Lotteries, new racket that gives away girls. And a photo exclusive inside a school for lady wrestlers.
Lady wrestlers, yes.
Yeah, that's yeah. I'd buy that. See, if that was on the shelf, I would have bought that along with my Beano comic.
Right. No, but yeah, no, sorry. But why I was thinking that this narrator was an asshole. This is the guy who consistently doesn't care that his subordinates are being eaten by a T-Rex. He's constantly like, I don't care about that. I've got a big commission to make. Yeah. And that yet he's the only one who ultimately survives. And they blow up the T-Rex, spoilers, with a bunch of nitro in a pool of oil.
Yeah.
And it's very Jurassic Park. Like that whole story is like, it just becomes increasingly a dry run for Jurassic Park.
It's also, he very much justifies it as well, though, right? Because he says, well, no, because all these people around the world will lose their jobs, and if we don't break this, we'll well, right? So what are all those lives, against, a few, but at the end, he does wonder if it was worth it, and
right,
should have stayed in Brooklyn.
Yes, yeah.
But what I liked about this one a little bit was that there was a bit more, like you said, the other ones are lists of this happened, this happened, this happened. This was a bit more, there was a bit more flourishes that put you in, like I'm sure he's never been to New Guinea in his life, but I liked the whole thing about the monsoon coming and waiting for the river to flood, and we got to get up river quick before the flood wall. All that stuff, for this kind of thing, it's fairly exciting. I kind of enjoy. I like my jungle adventures. So, it was more interesting than just, and then in 1965, Professor, I made it all up, discovered a footprint in a,
Yes, yeah. Oh, no, agreed. It's definitely one of the, but again, because it reads like a story.
Yes, and also, oddly enough, I wouldn't have thought I would have, oddly enough, my favorite story in the book is the one that has absolutely no sex or women in.
Okay. Right.
It's manly all the way, man.
Yes, it is. Well, then, but then you've always had the thing for submarine stories, and men in an enclosed, sweaty place under great stress and intense pressure, the pressure cooker of man-on-man action.
Right.
It, for some reason, really appeals to you, Clive.
Yeah.
But as I said, all I'm watching right now is kung fu movies without a single woman in them. Just the same thing, really.
Right.
Sweaty man-on-man action. It's good stuff. It is. And then the next.
Relax with this priest video.
yes, exactly. What's the one? Hot rockin', where they're all just like in the sauna, working out. And then the last scene is a bunch of like sweaty teenage boys like rocking out, and the band is literally flaming. They're on fire. Like it's just. And then we got A Man from Another Age, which is yet another Yeti story presented as reportage. More cowardly servants.
I quite like that.
Nice, once again, nice drawing.
Yeah. Artist uncredited for that one.
Yeah, and this is the one where some Canadian guy bankrolls them to find them. Oh, but this is the one that has all the sex in it. So this is the first story where the 4 Nepalese girls are found frolicking in a mountain river, and they're like, "Oh, yes," and they bone them. And it's also established just casually, like none of them was 18. Yes, right. Although they don't really look like, they just look like white girls in that illustration to me. But
we don't want to turn off the racist reader.
I guess so, yeah. But yeah, like it's the whole thing of like he's like not one of them was over 18 is established in that little part, which is like, wow, nice.
Well, I was wondering as well how much, especially the ones from the 50s, how much are they? Are these like former servicemen who are buying these things? Who actually are dealing with like PTSD and stuff. So in that case, Rage is actually the perfect title for a magazine.
Right. Well, that's funny because in this story is the one that has a character like Billy who has to prove his manhood because he's been such a coward all of his life that he can only redeem himself by wrestling a Yeti on top of a mountain and then dying, but he kills the Yeti at the end as well. But then, unfortunately, the Yeti falls into a crevasse, so we couldn't, bring the body back so that,
So I was upset, I was slightly disappointed as well. The next story I had high hopes for, just because it was something a bit different. Monster bird that carries off human beings, and also because the artwork was it's very quizzicotal. Is that how you pronounce it? Q the winged serpent.
Definitely.
I was primed for, as earlier I wanted humanoids from the deep. This time I wanted Q the winged serpent, but yeah, this actually wasn't that exciting in the end either. This story.
No, although I will say again, the thing that like there's often something that comes out of left field in these things that catches my eye. Like in fact, in the previous story, the thing that most caught my eye, other than the fact that the guy kept having sex with girls, because then he does it again later in the story.
Right.
But it's when the doctor shows up and is like, I've been living on Benzedrine for 16 days or something like that. And, you know, like, okay, what? Excuse me, doctor, I don't want you to.
Nice bit of awful full out lying here as well. In 1962, an airliner mysteriously crashed near Washington, D.C. Investigation produced evidence it had been hit by an enormous bird.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it turns out it didn't.
No. Yes. Yeah.
Just in case you were wondering why you'd never heard of the plane hitting a giant bird. It did happen.
Yes. But the thing that struck me about that one that came out of left field was like the part where they talked. I mean, they never named the camp, but they're like, well, yeah, everyone knows that there was that Japanese internment camp in California where all of the Japanese prisoners were taken off by Thunderbirds. Right. I'm like, well, I've never heard about this before, and I'm quite interested.
You know why? Because it didn't happen.
Oh, is that why I hadn't heard about this? All right.
There's a theme here.
Yeah. That one just, you know. And then so
as well, there was clearly a generation of who would now, you know, be, you know, red pilling it on 8chan or something.
Yes.
There must have been this generation of low tech who devoured this information and then went out and spread it, right? Like, yes. There was a case actually back during the war in a Japanese internment camp.
Yes.
People were they were called Thunderbirds, I believe the indigenous people call them. It wasn't reported, you know, and the files are in fucking Area 54. Whatever. 51, whatever.
No, probably they are in Area 54. That's where they keep the Thunderbird files.
Right. Area 55 is the Loch Ness stuff. Area 56 is,
Or was that what was his name? Jerry what? The guy who actually made the Thunderbirds.
Jerry Anderson.
Sorry, they're the Jerry Anderson files.
Well, that's a pretty nice piece of artwork as well.
Yeah, so that's the one where I was thinking that's the other one where the guy's a dick because he sleeps.
Nightmare Safari.
And that's the one too where I was like, now this has to be presented as a story because it's a well written story, right? About the whole, you know, search for these diamonds and again some gigantic lizard creature, you know. But then I'm like, no, it's the name matches the name in the story. This is being presented as fact. Which is amazing given what happens in that story.
You have to wonder, like, if there was anyone that gullible, they were like, "Oh, this is bullshit," and then just went back. Oh, it's the same names.
Yes,
must be true.
Yeah.
Average rage subscriber. I do apologize if there's any rage subscribers out there. You're all very articulate, intelligent, well-read people.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what comes out. I'm trying to remember what even comes after that. What are the last couple?
I encountered the abominable snowman.
Oh, is that the one where he feeds them chocolate and they become friends? That one's quite an outlier in the. Yeah. Although either they have sex with you and you have their children, or they rake the shit out of you. Because there's two kinds. I learned this. There's two types of Yeti. There's the one that lives on small animals, and there's the man eater. And I don't remember the names that are given for the two types. But
this cover confused me as well when I first looked at it because this fella here doesn't really look like any
a vampire. Yeah.
So I was like, and plus the snowy landscape is almost fills the page. So I was thinking, oh, is this abstract? And then does it relate to this? Smutville, USA.
USA, yeah, I wondered too.
Once known as a glamorous center of Broadway nightlife, world-famous Times Square has become a seething cauldron of vice, prostitution, and perversion. So I was thinking, oh, is that
Right, yeah, what's going down? What's going?
It's like a Bowery bum or something.
Right,
and this is like what happens in Times Square. And then I figured out, oh no, okay, it's just it's Hugh Jackman Yeti or something. It's like
right, yes, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, that was weird because that's the one, yeah, where they become friends. That's, you know, I guess that's the more pleasant, you know, option. Is that
totally different in the splash page for the?
Yeah, yeah. I'm guessing they maybe didn't brief the artist on what he was supposed to do very clearly.
Right. Artist uncredited again.
And then is the one after that the one about the there's the one about, which actually was, for me, one of the more interesting ones was all the stories about the sea beasts.
What is it of the seas?
Yes, yeah. That one, for whatever reason, like, again, I'm always willing to suspend my disbelief slightly further for sea creatures than for...
This made me laugh as well because this is from True, the men's magazine, the Christmas edition. So the cover is like unusually not super manly. You got a couple of cowboys.
Oh, yes, yes. That's so weird. Like decorating a pudding.
But it's Christmas. It's Christmas. No garroting Nazis or topless women. It's a time to be with a family of other men in cowboy.
That's a great cover. But again, you know, like as a perfect example of this kind of like the way that this stuff is always presented. And again, to any viewer of the History Channel, you will recognize this. Right. You'll recognize that from the 50s to 2021, you know, you're always going to get this. Can all these reports be cases of mistaken identity? All hoaxes, jokes, or plain lies? If liquor is the cause, why do exactly the same kinds of animals invariably accompany the alleged delirium tremens, or tremens, however you say that word, appearing only on or by the sea throughout the world? Why don't we get any pink elephants, or at least a few technicolored whales? Is it wishful thinking, or some atavistic product of folklore? Can it all be mass hallucination, as some scientists always contend? And what, incidentally, is mass hallucination? Which I will say, that last thing I was like, well, yeah, what is mass hallucination? Is it actually possible for multiple people to hallucinate the same thing?
I think so. I mean, there seem to be cases, right? Recorded cases of, I mean, I don't know how far I don't know. It's kind of like, for instance, the way I like to think of it is, sometimes if you take really, really, really strong acid or magic mushrooms, you will actually see things.
Yeah, sure.
But more often than not, you don't literally see things when you're tripping. You just have a sense of something.
An impression.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's a bit like that, right? Like where something's happened and there's hysteria and it's all heightened, and then afterwards when recalling, people are like, yeah, there was, I think there was a giant bird that took those guys at the internment camp, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yes, okay.
And then your mind, as you get older, fills in the blanks and you actually remember it more clearly. Like, yes, I can see it as clear as day, as if it just happened. I saw that thunderbird swoop down. And the human mind is a peculiar thing, isn't it?
This might well come up later on in the Aleister Crowley thing, in terms of situating ourselves relative to all of this. But I might have told you this before, but I have no experience. I've never seen a cryptid. I've never seen anything I thought was a Sasquatch or a giant thunderbird. I believe people have seen things that they thought were things, because I've seen things momentarily where I've misunderstood what I'm seeing, and I'm like, and I get really excited because I think, what the fuck? Like, is that an ape riding a bicycle? Right. You know, and then I'm like, oh no, it's a guy in a backpack and a hoodie in a certain, you know, from a certain angle, it really did look like a gorilla.
I'm not sure if ape riding a bicycle is a cryptid, but yes.
No, it's not what you would expect to see. I saw that in Tokyo, so I was particularly like, anyway, turned out not to be the case. But
when you were in deepest, darkest Tokyo on an expedition.
Yes, yeah,
Anything could happen.
Yes, I had my pith helmet on that day, but no. So Jen and I were driving. I might have told this before. Jen and I were driving up to her parents' house at night, and it's kind of up in the mountains. Basically, it's in the Okanagan Valley, so it's a valley, and it's a kind of a winding road, and it was dark, and walking along the white line, or whatever, the yellow line in the middle of the road, there was a man walking ahead of the car. And I said to Jen, hey, like, just to kind of, because she was driving, I was in the passenger seat, like, as though to say, slow down, there's a guy in the middle of the road walking. And then he vanished.
Okay.
And so then Jen turned to me and was like, what were you just going to say? And I said, as you would, nothing, right? Because I was like, and she said, no, like, what were you just going to say? And I said, yeah, like, I thought I saw a guy walking there in the middle of the road, and then he disappeared. So I thought I better not say anything about it. And she said, yeah, I saw him too.
Right.
And then we were both like, oh, that sucks, because I don't believe in ghosts and you don't believe in ghosts. So let's agree that we didn't just see a ghost or something we can't explain and continue driving.
Right.
But there is no question that we both had the same, I guess there you go. Maybe it was a mass hallucination, but we both saw the same figure.
Or you both saw something
that momentarily looked like.
Yeah, or was. And I mean, when you throw in car lights, nighttime.
Yeah, sure.
Speed.
So, but I should say, right now we have one viewer of this, who tuned in because of, he had also bought the book. He's like, yes, finally, we get to the meat.
Right. So we should. Did you follow up? I haven't had time. I haven't done this yet. But there's this. They have this, which is a cover of the aforementioned Argosy I mentioned, and this story isn't included in the book, but there's a link to it. It says.
Online. Okay. No. Yeah, that's
.com website. You can talk. They can read about this expedition. And I was kind of interested in this.
Well, hang on. This is the same cover that has the "Back from the Dead. Here's how the Russians do it."
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that article is also on the website.
Well, I was just jumped out at me as well because it's Argosy, which is one rung slightly higher, so it might be closer to being, a kind of slightly more rational take on it, and also a story by John de Passos.
Oh yes, I noticed that as well. Yeah, who was like, a proper novelist, and
Yeah. So, I was thinking that might be worth checking out. But then again, having said that, also in Argosy was the stone monster, the next story.
Right. Yes.
So yeah, I might have my hopes a bit. This is the chocolate one, by the way. This is.
Oh, that's the chocolate one. Okay, all right.
If you meet a Yeti that's crazy about chocolate, be good to him.
Yeah, he was a nice Yeti.
Yeah.
And then what was there anything after? I'm trying to remember what's the last.
Man's world.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yes.
That's a man's world.
Yes. And this is where I had my revelation actually. But so if we want to finish up the book, I'll tell you what my revelation was. It was exactly on that page, and I went back through the rest of the book to try to figure out if I was correct in my.
Yeah, I'm wondering if other stories on this cover. We found Mussolini's secret $60 million treasure cave, the strange erotic rites of the Polynesians. The same, and this is from 1973. So it hasn't really changed that much
since 1952. No, it's 20 years at this point. Yeah, 21 years of this.
But what also strikes me about this cover of Man's World is this could almost just be porn man.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely looks much more like we've now entered into the next stage of men's magazines. Yeah.
And just say jugs or something. And you don't
absolutely.
change anything. And because even those magazines would have the articles in as well.
Yes, exactly. I think generally maybe the men's adventure magazine just transmogrified or over time into the men's magazine, to be found in the men's magazine section.
Eventually they kind of yeah, like playing Kaplunk with porn or something. Like, take
Yes.
out the articles about politics, no one's interested.
Yeah.
Get rid of that crappy Babe Ruth cover.
Yeah.
You know, boom, boom, and then eventually, hang on, people just
Yeah.
want sex,
Yes.
and now we can do it. Let's give them that.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think so. So
So
it was
what
on that.
big revelation then. Nick?
So it was on that very page. I suddenly was like, hang on. So I started going back through and I was like, I looked at all of those headlines throughout the various covers. And, you know, I found some of them you've already said, but, you know, when women prowl, 5 reveal the special kind of men and passion they seek. Here's another one. The female sex cycle, what you must know. Facts on hormones and emotions.
Yeah. People taking notes, right?
And here's another one. Yeah. A go-go dancer, a sales girl, and a college girl tell. Here's what we mean by better sex. So I was like, oh shit. Women are cryptids to the readers of Rage.
Yes, absolutely.
An unknowable,
yeah.
an unknowable feature of life that, like, what do they want?
Yeah.
What are they all about? How do I find them?
The only difference is, in general, most men don't want to fuck Yetis. So you don't get articles which are like, you know, how to impress a Yeti.
Yeah.
Guaranteed sex with Loch Ness Monster if you follow these 5 steps.
Yes. but you see what I'm getting at though, right?
No,
like
it's a solid. I hadn't thought of that. You're bang on the money there. I was just wondering, there might actually be one extremely niche magazine that did cover, like.
We should, if not, we should definitely write it. We should make sure that we create
bestiality for men.
Yeah. Wow.
No, that's interesting. Actually, I never thought about it, but yeah, it does. It is, isn't it? It's in exactly the same.
Presented in the same kind of way.
Yeah. How women who want to have sex, and how does one find such a mystery? I better bone up on my men's adventure magazines and. Yeah.
So yeah, it was funny. I burst out laughing as soon as I had this. I was like, oh my god.
No,
yes.
You deserve a pat on your little ginger head for that, Nick. I hadn't made a connection myself. That's that's absolutely the case, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, what it made me want is I wanted to then read that book. I want to read all those articles, all those
right.
You know, we talked to 6 scientists, you know, guys with like mustaches and pipes, like, well.
Right. Right.
In my research.
Yeah, with some like cheerleaders tied up like electrodes and then they would
exactly
beat out. What do you think when I say penis? Yes. Yeah. Kind of thing.
So yeah, it's interesting. I think like you maybe overall the book was not great. I think it was a bit disappointing. In the whole, in parts, it was great. I enjoyed certain stories. I enjoyed certain features of the book, but overall, I was more interested in what I saw at the back of the book in terms of some of the other titles, and in the hopes that maybe they would be, you know, especially when it is just presented as fiction, then it becomes more easy. It's this whole thing of like presenting it as though it's real, and then they can't push things as far then.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? If it's just a horror story, if it's just a sex Yeti story, you can go balls to the wall with that stuff.
Yeah.
But here, there's always this feeling of like, oh, we have to make sure it's bollocks, but it has to fall within these parameters of somewhat feasible bollocks, not the unfeasible bollocks of Buster Gonad, for example.
Right. But I don't want to actually leave it on that. I actually do want to say I do very much appreciate what the Men's Adventure Library has done, and I am pleased that this book exists.
Yes,
I think it's a really good record, and I'm glad I own it, and it'll be potentially a kind of interesting reference thing, or just to show someone else as well. Like, look at this, like, you know, know this interesting bit of 20th century history. And maybe, I suppose, we rushed into it a bit too giddy, and it might, I mean, put it next to your bed, read one story a night or even a week, and you might get more out of it.
More than
that way.
binging it, yeah.
Yeah, but I
But
said we had more to say about it than I thought I would. Like I thought I might actually run out of stuff to say after 10 minutes, but
right.
we seem to have dragged it out sufficiently.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you know, it's I've talked about this before too. But my friend Tavis's dad opened this incredible bookshop in Penticton called The Bookshop. And it's huge. And one of the things that I learned from hanging out with Tavis's dad and with Tavis was this whole underground world of like how collections of books come into a secondhand bookshop, and how there's people pass away and their collections, kind of their wives or are like, I don't want to deal with this terrifying like this wall of crap behind me that at some point some poor bastard will have to throw in a dumpster or figure out what to do with, right?
It seems he was fascinated by cryptids.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? So I was always, that's what, when Tavis would call me up and be like, you're like we got stuff this weekend that you were not going to believe. And so I'd come down to Penticton and go into the store, and he would have like filing cabinets full of like alphabetized UFO sightings or, spiral bound. Because the thing is, like, a lot of the stuff, the real crazy, is not found even in the magazines. It's found at that next level down of the self-published newsletter or that spiral bound, thing, like mimeographed, like, so that's where, I first saw the Hollow Earth, Nazis on the moon, all that stuff. I saw through these, but like, it somehow has more grit to it when you see it in that form, when you see it in somebody's mania.
Yeah,
all these press clippings
and annotated, like they have these men's adventure magazines, but they bought it purely for those articles. And
yes, and they would be clipped out.
Yeah,
and they would have been clipped out and placed in this file of like sightings of and
like a real life Fox Mulder.
And every now and again this stuff would come in, often with other things that were way less savory as well, and you'd be kind of like, oh, this guy had a wide array of very disturbing interests, but
all one very specific
very disturbing interest, followed down all these different rabbit holes to various ends, but yeah, so I know that it's interesting, but like you said earlier on in this, I think you have to be very careful, because it's a huge time suck. And it's not going anywhere useful at all. You're not going to be you're not going to be the one who does figure out, hang on, that's where they are. That's where the X is on, and
I think in a way that's what takes the fun out of it a bit. I think if you're slightly more agnostic, there's always that possibility that you're gonna hang on, and you're gonna find some connection between one men's adventure magazine story and another, and you link, and then you might have found the one fact, and it'll lead you off. But if you don't believe at all, then and you're just reading nonsense, that also kind of takes a bit of the fun out of it. In a way, that's the thing when presented with something like this. Your skill as a reader is how much are you willing to suspend your disbelief in order to enjoy it. And in some ways, I wish I could, like, for instance, we mentioned Fox Mulder, whenever the X-Files started, 93 or something like that, I would have been 14 and, slightly more open to maybe something. And I remember, even though I was never actually swept up in the X-Files series, I always liked the potential of it more than the actual results. Although there were, good episodes. But the one thing that always struck me from the beginning was I really liked that idea of having a warehouse full of
about having a mania.
And
where you spent all this time collecting.
Was to,
But I have a copy of the
strings up on the wall.
I have a copy of the Spine Grinder right here, though, Clive.
Right.
Is this not? And this is volume 1. of
Yeah,
your
okay.
book
Fair,
about movies.
fair dues. And yes, if you do look on my walls as well, I mean, yeah, I was saying I don't have posters, but I do have lots of scrawled notes. And
So people walk in and think like they figure out who the Zodiac killer is based on your wall, even though that's not what you're trying to figure out.
yeah, pretty much that is what my office does kind of look like at times, is like, yeah, as if I'm doing it. But at least I'm, my things.
Yeah, the movies are real. Somebody made the movie.
True.
Yes, yeah. You didn't just imagine. That'd be an awesome twist as M. Night Shyamalan twisted. Like,
Right.
no, Clive, none of these movies exist. What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
But
There's no such thing as Herschel Gordon Lewis. It's just something people say to make children go to bed early. Herschel Gordon Lewis will get you. Anyway, we've gone way, way off track. And
yes,
more importantly, I need to take a dump.
Okay, all right, that's a great place to end. Maybe you'll, maybe you'll attract a yeti.
A yeti.
By the stank of your bowel movement.
Right. Let's be open. Okay. Well, until next time, where we'll be talking some more literary as feck. You have been watching
Nicolas O'Sheacon
and me, Clive Davis, and yeah, we'll hope you got some enjoyment out of this.
Especially you readers of
Rage magazine.
Probably just woke up.
I'm surprised
in my building.
The magazine. Daddy.
Tear it in half.
See you.
Take care, Clive.